Well, what happened was one evening I was in the flat with my two friends, and the door knocked, and I thought, no one knocks on our door, no one ever visits us. And then I had this kind of fear that it might be the police and it might be something to do with my application to join. So I kind of bounded to the front door, opened it, and there was an officer in full uniform, an inspector, Hambleton from Clapham Police Station. I've come to see Paul Wilson. Yes, that's me. Yes, Mr. Wilson, about your application. Yes. Well, what we do is a home visit to see your circumstances and the people that you're living with, to see whether or not it's suitable as a police officer, because we can't have police officers living just anywhere and with anyone. And that's what they did in those days. That's what they did. Unannounced home visits to assess the suitability of your home and the people that you're living with. And I said to him, wait there 1 second, because my friends don't know that I'm and you're gonna, and he said, well, I can't. He said, I've got to come in. So I turned and I literally ran back into the living room, and I blurted out to my two friends, I'm joining the police, and there's a police officer now, and he's coming to check on you and the flat. And they just looked at me like shell-shocked. What are you talking about? And by that time, this inspector, suited and booted with his top hat on and everything, was standing in our living room. And he said, oh, okay, gents. He said, I just need to take a few details. And of course, one of my friends, what is that? And I was going, please, please. Anyway, they were both good, actually. They both complied. They gave the details. And to cut a long story short, he was happy. He was happy with where I was living. Because the guys I was living with, one worked for the Ministry of Defence, and the other one worked for Metropolitan Police. He was in a similar position to myself. So it wasn't going to be an issue. But yeah, I'll always remember that day. And yeah, I started at Hendon Police Training College in July 1983. And which, you know, I write about in some detail in my book. And having lived in London for, at this stage, for 3 years, over 3 years, and then suddenly to be plunged into this very kind of sanitized, very white environment, it becomes a bit of a shock to me, actually, because I was kind of used to now mingling with, you know, different people, you know, multicultural environment, and then all of a sudden I'm turning up at Hendon and I see all of these police officers, rows and rows and rows of police officers, you know, on a parade ground, you know, and one black face. And I remember looking at her and thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done? And I remember walking past all of these, you know, police officers stood to attention. And I remember the sergeant at the head of the group looking at me really slowly as I walked past. But yeah, I mean, Hendon was, as far as I'm concerned, it was a necessary. Of course, it was very necessary. It skilled me in so many ways. But I can't lie, it wasn't a happy experience. I found it a bit mundane, a bit boring, actually. You know, a lot of the learning was, you know, you used to have to learn large quantities of legalistic jargon and policy and blah, blah, and I wasn't used to that. And I don't think anyone is used to it, because we used to have to memorize so much. You know, the Theft Act, we would, you know, the Offences Against the Person Act. You used to have to memorize these acts of parliament, and then you'd be tested on a regular basis. You would have to go out on in the grounds of the police college and enact incidents, and you'd be tested on how you responded to it, you know, and it was very intensive, but it needed to be, because, you know, when I finished, I was sent to Croydon police station, and it was my first police station. And I felt that having worked for the police solicitors, having worked with police officers on, you know, a fairly regular basis at court, I felt I was prepared and equipped for whatever I might find at a police station. But I was very, very wrong. And I think this is really important, because we hear lots of things said about police culture, and many people might think, well, you worked for the police, so you knew just what to expect. Well, no, that was not true. I worked for the police, yes, but the uniformed police have a different culture to the civil staff, if I can call them that, the civilians who work for the police in the clerical capacity and in many other capacities. They do not share the same culture. So the uniformed officer who is on the front line and is coming face to face with all sorts of incidents on a daily basis, there's a certain culture, a certain behavior that's grown up as a result of that type of work. And I found that culture, it was quite rough. It was very laddish, and it was very racist. Not necessarily to me, but to Black people in general. You know, racial slurs were fairly used on a common everyday basis. And it was not something I was used to, and it was something that made me feel uncomfortable. But, you know, you've got this far, you've done all this training, and you think, well, why would I want to leave now? What would that prove? You know, so rather I stay and see what I can do, than walk out. But I must admit, you know, many nights, and they were usually nights when I'm on night duty, start at 11 p.m. and you finish at 7. And in those days, in 1983, you walked on your own and you patrolled on your own. So I would go out on night duty and I would mull things over, and I would sort of think to myself, here I am, you know, mixed heritage, brought up in a white environment, used to working and very familiar with kind of the white way of doing things and white culture. But here I am in an environment that makes me feel very uncomfortable. So what must it be like for someone off of the Stockwell Park estate who joined the police, who will have not had my experiences, who will not be familiar with the white way of doing things, who will not be familiar with the kind of the laddish, the white humor, and the racist remarks. And I used to replay this time and time again and think, well, this is why the Metropolitan Police cannot recruit from Black communities. It cannot and will never recruit from Black communities until things are made better inside. And I thought about this at a very, very early age. It was not rocket science. You know, Black people would join and then they would leave in great numbers. Actually, disproportionately high numbers of Black people would always leave. uh, premature resignation. The attrition rate amongst black constables was significantly higher than it was for white constables. And I had no doubt as to why this was. You know, it wasn't a particularly welcoming environment. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute all the officers directed their racist remarks at black people within the police. That wasn't the case. But there were instances where, you know, there was name calling. They were given nicknames, I know. And I write about an incident in my book. My first Christmas at Croydon Police Station, I started at the police station in November, end of November. So I was keen to make an impression. So I knew there was a station Christmas do at a local pub. So I made some inquiries and thought, yeah, I'll go along. And because I was still quite confident, I'd worked for Metropolitan Police solicitors. I had, you know, I felt like I had that kind of privilege sitting behind me. I've worked for Met solicitors. I know some important folk. You know, you guys don't faze me. So I decided to invite my girlfriend, who just happens to be black, to the Christmas do, which was held at a pub in Croydon, and it would be December 1983. And now at this, she worked in a bank, and Barclays Bank actually, and she was very familiar with working in a predominantly white environment, and you know, very cosmopolitan, attractive lady, intelligent. So I thought, yeah, she's not going to have a problem at all. And so we kind of entered the kind of the function room at the pub, and there was a long table, and we took a seat at the table, and you know, ordered some drinks, and things were going quite well. And then after probably about half an hour, more people came in, and it's quite clear some people had had more to drink than others. And then the kind of the language deteriorated, and the guys started talking about their recent, you know, escapades on the streets involving black people, and then start using the N-word and other kind of racial slurs to describe these kind of encounters. And I remember looking at my black girlfriend who was sitting opposite me, and her eyes were getting very glossy. She was clearly getting very distressed at this. And I could not believe that I brought her into this environment, kind of, because, you know, I'd only been at the station, you know, a few weeks, but I'd heard so much, and I should have known that this was going to happen. And she was picking at her food. She was looking everywhere. And she clearly didn't want to be there. And, you know, and it just got worse. And I just put my knife and fork down, and I told her, come on, we're going. And we left. And I think there's a few people looked at us in surprise, but no one followed us out and said, hey guys, why? Because no one really knew me. I was a new kid, you know, I was a new guy, and no one knew me. I didn't have any teammate. I didn't have a team at that time. I just sort of thought, you know, let me, you know, familiarize myself with my colleagues. And yeah, it was a very painful experience. And you know, I don't think my girlfriend forgave me for a long time. She just couldn't understand how I could work with these idiots. And so that was one of my early that was my initiation initiation into the police in many ways, you know. And but things, they did get better, obviously, and I was allocated a team, and I got on quite well with everyone, it seemed. But there was always this noise, as I call it. It was noise, and it was kind of, black people were racialized, and you know, I don't think anyone I worked with was very conscious of it other than myself, and how difficult it was, for me. And there were, I think, something like 3 other black officers that I would see at but you didn't socialize with other black officers because it wasn't acceptable. There would be snidey remarks made if you were seen talking to another black officer. Are you guys going to riot? Are you going to overthrow us? And things like this. So it was, you're made to feel very uncomfortable. And yeah, and you certainly didn't disclose to your colleagues that you might have been to a black night spot or you've been to a reggae club. You did not. In fact, the reverse was true. I kind of lied and said I'd been to these clubs, which were kind of thought to be acceptable because that's where white officers went. So I was leading 2 lives. There's no doubt about it. And I became very adept at leading 2 lives. One inside the police, and then I would immerse myself in a kind of a black culture outside of policing as a kind of antidote to what I was experiencing inside. I just felt, when you read these things now, psychologists have all sorts of, nice names for them, coping strategies, coping mechanisms. This is what we do. I've also read a paper that says, with that change of identity comes stress. And I just feel that it's never, ever been recognized. It's never been formally recognized that, the black police officer in adapting to that kind of culture brought about stress, and that stress is never or was never recognized. And undoubtedly some people had to leave because the stress was too much and that they couldn't cope. And I found, a novel way of dealing with it, kind of splitting myself in 2, basically. So, there was some normality there as I saw it. But, I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy policing, because I did, but this was an added layer of difficulty that I had that white officers didn't have. So I had to find ways of kind of fitting into an organization that at that time was not friendly towards black people. I had to find ways of fitting in. And I also had to fit into a culture that didn't particularly like police, so it was interesting. And during that time I started visiting the United States, and because that's where my kind of my African American identity, I wanted to understand my history, and I would visit. I found very cheap ways of visiting the United States, and that was like that was a boost for me to go to the United States. I made friends with a police officer in the United States, a black guy, and I saw all these black police officers. I saw black senior police officers in Washington, D.C. I would go quite regularly. And I thought, wow, if only. I even toyed with the idea of kind of transferring somehow or emigrating to the United States. Thankfully, I didn't. So I thought the best way for me to get out of this situation is to get promoted. So I became very focused, and I passed my sergeant's exam kind of after kind of 4.5 years. But I passed it in a way that I would had to have had a board, and that board would have been comprised of men who would look at me thinking, who is this young upstart? Why does he think he can be a sergeant? So I didn't even go for the board. I waited until the next year, took the exam again, and got a pass, which was called a competitive pass, which meant that I was a sergeant. Just because I'd got a particular pass, that was it. No interviews, nothing. I was a sergeant. So, I went to Catford police station as a sergeant. And it was at Catford that something happened that was to change my my career, my police career, my outlook on policing, and my understanding of policing, and my understanding of the race issue. It was to change it dramatically. After I'd been at Catford for about just over a year, I was called in to see the superintendent, who said, Paul, he said, all Black and Asian officers, yourself included, have to attend a series of 2-day seminars at Bristol Polytechnic. I'm afraid it's not up for discussion. You've got to go.